I'm going to be explaining to you now what we know of the bill as of June 2023. So who is my landlord? So right now it's quite difficult to get that much information about your landlord. You can't get very much. You have the right to ask your letting agent for your landlord's name and address. You can also pay £3 to access the government's land registry to find out who owns a property. I did that for my place that I'm in now. It is possible you can do it, but obviously it doesn't tell you that much. It just tells you who owns the property. And then some people will also live in a house that needs a license. So there's information about the landlord via the license scheme, but that's only about 7% of all homes in around the country, and that includes all houses which are made up of 5 or more unrelated people, and that's also you may know that as a house of multiple occupancy or a HMO. So all of those have to be licensed. And then there's also some other splatterings of licensing scheme around the country to find out about. So so not much, basically. You can find out a few things about landlords, about your landlord, but not masses. The government plans to change that. In the new plans, we are going to have a brand new property portal. This is in that all landlords need to register. They're going to be required to register. So we're finally going to know how many landlords and who the landlords are in England, which will be quite exciting. It will be possible to check the status of your home online via the portal. And although we're not quite sure exactly yet, there's still some more sort of legislation still to come, but we are expected to include additional bits of information on the property portal, including gas safety, energy efficiency, and criminal convictions. So splattering certainly quite a bit more information than what we can already get access to under the old system, under the current system. We'll be getting some more information under the current government plans. We would quite like some more at Generation Rent. We think there should be more information available. We want to see energy bills, we want to see rents, we want to see a history of enforcement and deposit disputes as well, to check what quality these landlords are. This is sort of really important information that tenants going to have at their disposal that could be made available via the property portal, and we're going to be pushing for that in the bill. We also want this to be a really great way of spreading the word about information about your rights, especially how to deal with problems with your landlords, problems of disrepair, and just to sort of really get that information out there in a sort of really accessible way via the portal. We want for there to be sort of built-in and easy ways of claiming compensation from non-compliant landlords via the property portal. We want it to be sort of just a simple, easy process that people can get back rent that is due in certain circumstances when landlords have misbehaved, or they've broken the law. And we think that failure to register from landlords leads to protections of eviction from tenants. So ultimately, the bill is bringing us some good stuff, some extra bits of information that tenants are going to find useful, but we are going to be pushing for more stuff to be made available for you. So could I be evicted? Obviously, another big question. Under the current system, often, unfortunately, yes, you can be evicted, and relatively easily. There is, as I'm sure many of you know, something called Section 21, no fault eviction, that landlords can use, where they don't need to give a reason to evict a tenant, and they only need to give 2 months' notice to evict that tenant. There are some protections from this. It's invalid, for example, if the landlord hasn't protected the deposit in a proper scheme, if they haven't provided things like the energy performance certificate, the EPC, gas safety certificate, and all the how to rent guide, if the property isn't licensed properly, and if the council has served the home with an improvement notice. An improvement notice is when a home is found to be unsafe and the council issue a notice that the landlord needs to improve the property. So if these circumstances happen, then you can get a bit of a protection from a Section 21, but it's quite unusual or quite difficult to get, and often the landlord can just issue the correct bits of documents and then start up the Section 21 process again, unfortunately. Another means of evicting a tenant is the Section 8 evictions, and these are evictions that are going to be very, very important in the new in the new system, which are evictions that the landlord has a good reason for. So, and it has to follow due process. You have to follow due process for Section 21, but then have to go through a special court process to evict tenants. According to new plans, we are finally, or the government are finally abolishing Section 21, which is a huge success, and I'm sure everyone's very happy about that. We certainly are. And they're also going to be introducing open-ended tenancies. So, as well as removing Section 21, which is obviously a good thing, they are going to be sort of changing some of the Section 8 grounds, which is the way of evicting a tenant that I mentioned earlier. And they're going to sort of be strengthening a few of these grounds and adding some new ones. So probably the most important one to remember about these new grounds is there's going to be a new eviction grounds for intention to sell, and there's going to be an eviction ground to reoccupy the property. And reoccupying the property is if a landlord wants to move in, or if a landlord's immediate family wants to move in as well. So in these grounds, one of these grounds, you as a tenant will have, when you have a new tenancy, you will have a protection for the first 6 months of a new tenancy. So you will have what is sort of similar to a fixed term tenancy for the first 6 months that you start a new tenancy. If a landlord then chooses to evict you under these grounds, they then cannot re-let the property for 3 months after that. So that's been added as a way of trying to prevent landlords from exploiting this or abusing this ground in order to just sort of conveniently get rid of tenants in a sort of Section 21 by the back door type way. As well as these additional grounds, there is going to also be a new ground, which allows the landlord to evict whilst complying with enforcement action. So enforcement action could be a whole list of different things. It could be sort of when they've let out an unsafe home and they've had an improvement notice made against them, if they've been found to be renting out an overcrowded home, if they've been found to be renting out a home that hasn't been licensed when it should have been. If this and a few other circumstances, if the landlord is complying with those measures and is taking steps to improve the home, then they can actually, under the new plans, evict a tenant during this time, which we have a problem with because we think that disincentivizes tenants from going and reporting criminal landlords, but we'll get to that a bit later. There's going to be another new ground as well, and this is going to be the repeated rent arrears ground. There is already a rent arrears ground under the system that we have now, but this is now a new repeated rent arrears ground. So this is a bit of a harsher, or it's an extra ground basically to get to evict a tenant, and it's specifically if you as a tenant have been found to be in 2 months of rent arrears or more on 3 days over 3 years. So we obviously have some problems with this new ground. We think it's quite unfair, but that is a new ground under the new government plans that may be set to come in. Some good news for tenants is that according to both the old rent arrears ground that's already in place and the new recurrent one the government are looking to bring in, courts will no longer be sort of allowed to, they will have to take into account universal credit delays. So these are things like the 5 weeks that people have to wait for universal credit to come in, and also it also counts where if you're, for example, your universal credit comes in a few days after your rent is due, and you're sort of in rent arrears for a couple of days because the dates don't quite match. So it won't, you will avoid eviction or be protected from eviction in those sorts of circumstances. So there is a bit of flexibility brought in, but it is certainly something to keep an eye on. And finally, there are going to be some changes to the antisocial behaviour grounds. They're going to be sort of reducing the threshold for the requirement of what constitutes enough antisocial behaviour to warrant an eviction. It's going to change from likely to cause nuisance to the potential to cause nuisance, which again, we do have a bit of a problem with that wording, but move on to that. I could talk about that a bit more. So tenancy reform, what else do we think is needed? We think there needs to be more protection when a landlord wants to sell or move back in. So these are evictions that are going to be happening completely where a tenant is not at fault. So we think tenants need more protection in these circumstances in particular. We think there should be longer notice periods given. Under the current plans, under the selling the house and moving in, the government think that they should only give tenants 2 months notice, which we completely disagree with. So we want to see longer notice periods than that. We want to see longer protected periods, so that's the 6 months protected period that everybody gets when they have a new tenancy. We want to see longer than 6 months, and we also want to see relocation payments, because we don't think that tenants who are being evicted through no fault of your own should be expected to cover the moving costs. That should be the landlord that covers that cost. We think that courts should be given the discretion in all evictions. They're the experts, they're the people who should ultimately decide if a person should be evicted or not. There shouldn't be an automatic eviction just because stipulations A, B, and C have happened. Tenants' hardship needs to be taken into account. People have very complicated and often difficult lives. That needs to be taken into account during all evictions. So we want to see all grounds at the discretion of courts ultimately. And we want to see some better safeguards against abuse. So we want to see a longer no relet period, and that's the 3 months that a landlord cannot put the property back on the rental market after they've evicted you for them moving in or for selling the house. We don't think 3 months is long enough at all. We think that's open to exploitation. So we are going to be pushing for a longer relet period there. And we also want to see some limits on the actual rent increases, how much landlords are increasing their rent. Because there is a bit of a danger that they're going to be using sort of big rent increases to evict people that way, which could potentially be a Section 21 via the back door. So we'll be pushing against that, as well as a whole list of other things. So next question, can my landlord raise the rent? So yes, under various circumstances in the current system, the landlord can raise the rent. If you and a landlord agree and you sign a new tenancy, and then the rent will just go up and you'll stop paying the new rent. That's one way. Alternatively, a landlord can serve you something called a Section 13, which is where they just formally request that your rent's going to be going up now. You can challenge this. Oh, the presentation's disappeared. Okay. You can challenge this at a first tier tribunal, but something to bear in mind is that the tribunal could not only agree with the landlord that they think the rent should be as much as they've said, but they can actually say that they think you should be paying more than what the landlord said. So, for example, if you're paying £500 a month and your landlord wants you to pay £600 a month, the tribunal could turn around and say, well, actually, rent's around you £700 a month. So we think that you should be paying that. So there's a big deterrent amongst some tenants for using the tribunal system, which is obviously a problem. And ultimately, Section 21, being evicted for no fault of your own, for no very, very easily, just makes it very difficult to negotiate rent increases, because ultimately a landlord can just evict someone and then move in someone who is going to pay the higher rent. So the good news about that is Section 21 is going. So that does give tenants a lot more power, and it gives them a bargaining chip in negotiating and questioning rent increases. We're seeing an end to the open-ended tenancies. Sorry, open-ended tenancies will mean we're seeing an end to, or at least a sort of a reduction of renewal processes, where at the end of a fixed term, your rent sort of automatically goes up just every year or every 6 months, or how often that will be. So that could be real positive. And the government are also going to be bringing in restrictions, which mean that a landlord could only increase the rent once per year, which again will be a good thing.
Tilly,
so
the screen share's just dropped. Could you put it back on?
Sorry, that's why it disappeared for a second. I don't know what happened. Anyway, okay, it's back now. Is that okay? I'm assuming it is. Sorry about that.
We can see it now.
Sorry, everyone. It's back now. So the rent tribunal, what else is needed? We do know ultimately, and I'm sure everyone watching this knows, market rents are still unaffordable. It doesn't matter if we sort of add in extra controls and stuff, it's unaffordable. So as well as just having a restriction on the number of times a landlord could increase rent. We want to see a limit on how much the landlord could increase that rent, and we want that to be directly tied to affordability criteria. So something like wage inflation, for example. So it shouldn't be going faster than wage inflation. It should be a wage that it should be a rent that is affordable to people. Probably an uncontroversial point, but there we go. Needs to be made. We want to see a more user-friendly tribunal. If you're listening to this and thinking I've never heard of a first-tier tribunal or that I could query rent increases on it, then you're certainly not alone. Not many people know about the tribunal systems. So we want to see more accessibility, more user-friendly features, for example, with online applications, potentially through the property portal, or certainly more accessible for people to be able to question rent increases. And what I said earlier about how tribunals can not only agree with the landlord, but say, actually, we think that you should pay even more than what the landlord thought. We think that's a problem. It puts people off using tribunals, so we think that that should be not allowed. So tribunals should not be able to award more than the requested rent. What the landlord said as what the rent they wanted should be the absolute maximum that they're allowed to get. Okay, what can I do if my home is unsafe? So there's a fair few things you can do under the current system. So if your home is found to be unsafe by the council, so when they've sent in a inspector to inspect the property and they found there to be category 1 hazards, and these are the most dangerous hazards, councils then can enforce. They will issue an improvement notice, and then that will require a landlord to improve the property to make it safe. For 6 months after the notice is issued, you are also protected from a Section 21 eviction, which is obviously a good thing. And in in some circumstances, you can also claim back some of your rent in something called a rent repayment order. I believe you can get something up to a year of rent back in some of the worst situations. So there is some stuff that we can do under the current system. And finally, if you really want to go it alone, there is something called the Homes Fit for Human Habitation Act. And this means that you can sue your landlord if they've not made your home fit for human habitation. So according to the government plans, what is going to be, they're going to be adding some additional minimum standard requirements in privately rented properties, as well as just being safe. They now must be decent. So this is going to include the free of disrepair, adequate kitchen and bathroom facilities, and thermal comfort, so making sure your homes are warm enough. This is the Decent Homes standard, which is already in place in the social sector, so they're going to be extending that to the private sector. It's certainly expected to be. Again, this is another sort of bit that's sort of wrapped up in secondary legislation, but we are confident, and the government have said that they will be bringing in additional standards requirements to be in the bill soon. And as well as all of this, there is going to be something called a new ombudsman for the private rented sector. An ombudsman is ultimately sort of a person at the very top of the chain that you can complain to independently. So if you have problems that you're struggling to get repairs done, that you're struggling to get your landlord to make your home safe or decent, in theory, you'll be able to complain to a ombudsman, which should obviously be very good for renters. But as always, we do want some more stuff. We think that there is currently a law called Awaab's Law, which obviously I'm sure most people here are familiar with, a really sad case of the boy who died not long ago, associated with mould. This is a law which is targeting, the intention of this law is to bring in timescales for landlords to deal with damp and mould. It's specifically in its current form focusing on council housing, so we want to see that included in the rental sector, because mould is dangerous regardless of the tenure of housing that you're living in. We want to see more powers and really importantly more funding for councils to take action. Lots of councils are struggling under the current laws to get the enforcement out there that we need, let alone the new enforcement that may well be required under the new bill. So we need to see proper funding in councils so that they can actually enforce this. And we also want to make superior landlords in rent-to-rent arrangements liable for criminal offences. Rent-to-rent arrangements are sort of strange, often quite dodgy, I think I can say, arrangements by which there's a big chain of people involved, and there's maybe someone at the top who gets away with gets away scot-free because it hasn't been legislated or looked at very well. So we want to see people who are sort of the top of these chains held accountable in these sorts of arrangements. Okay, so can a landlord refuse to let to me? And the current rights, it is unlawful to refuse to rent to someone just because they receive benefits, but it is not formally banned. However, landlords can sort of get around this quite easily. They can impose affordability criteria, which doesn't take into account, which doesn't consider benefits a source of income, even though of course they are. Landlords can, under the current system, landlords cannot discriminate on race or nationality. But there is also a requirement called right to rent, where all landlords are required to check their potential tenants' right to rent in this country, and if they are found to have rented to someone who doesn't have the right to rent in this country, they can suffer a criminal conviction, even a prison sentence. So this is obviously extremely off-putting for a lot of landlords renting to people who are migrants, and we know that there's active discrimination going on in the market because of this, even to people who do have the right to rent, but landlords are just too nervous to rent to them. And under the current system, landlords can refuse to rent to families with children. So a lot of this is going to be, in theory, changing. So the current government plans will mean that people are no longer allowed to issue formal bans, also no DSS bans is often referred to, so bans against people who claim benefits, and they will not be allowed to enforce blanket bans on children either. Again, this is sort of expected. It's going to be sort of secondary legislation or future legislation, but it is expected to be in the bill at a sort of slightly later stage. But that is, well, if not a surety, certainly something that we are expecting. Again, the affordability criteria is likely to remain. Landlords can sort of get around this quite easily, unfortunately. So it just will remain a bit of very difficult for lots of benefit claimants to find landlords who will rent to them. And right to rent is also is looking to stay in place, which we know means that migrants and people with non-European, non-British sounding surnames, or people who are minority ethnic, are often refused tenancies when they should be given tenancies, which is bad. So what do we want to see? Well, ultimately, the affordability checks could be made so much less of a problem for benefit claimants if the welfare system, the benefit system was beefed up, if people got the proper support. We want to see increased local housing allowance, and we also want to see a scrap of the benefits cap, which is ultimately stopping people who are claiming benefits from accessing good quality homes. We want to see that, we want to require benefit income to be accepted for affordability checks, because it's a source of income. Why people would discriminate against a valid source of income, I do not know, but there you go. And we do want to see the scrapping of right to rent, as well as no recourse to public funds. And no recourse to public funds is where certain groups of people cannot claim universal credits, and as bad as not substantial as universal credit is, having no access to universal credit is even worse. So and this is particularly bad, particularly the case amongst asylum seekers and refugees. So we want to see the scrapping of no recourse to public funds and right to rent. The bill should finally also include measures to stop insurers and lenders banning tenants who claim benefits or who are asylum seekers. So some insurers will stipulate that they will not insure a property that give landlord insurance if they are going to rent to benefit claimants, and then I'll sort of get around renting to benefit claimants by using this point. So insurers should not be able to do that, and they should not, and mortgage providers should not prevent landlords who they are providing a mortgage for from renting to asylum seekers either. Okay, final bit. Can I get a pet? There's been quite a lot of stuff on this, so I thought we'd do a bit of a slide on it. So at the current system, it is entirely up to your landlord if they are going to give you permission to have a pet in their property, and they don't need to give you a reason for refusing. They can just use blanket bans effectively. They're not allowed to take more than 5 weeks deposit. That's limited by the Tenant Fees Act, so they can't take an extra deposit for pets, for example, but they can charge a higher rent. Sort of, they'll say, oh, I don't really want to rent to you with the pet, but if you pay me 50 quid extra a month, then you can have a cat. So they can do that under the current system. As a fun bit of trivia, there is also an obscure law which lets you have rabbits and hens. I think this goes back to medieval, I think, as a law or two. I'm sure someone could correct me on that. But ultimately, even this is undermined by the fact that Section 21 means a landlord can just evict a tenant who decides to occupy their garden with rabbits. So again, not great. So what's going to change the government plans? Well, we are looking to see fewer evictions generally with the removal of Section 21, which means that people who own pets won't have to keep looking for pet-friendly landlords to have to keep moving to. Under the new system, you will be able to ask your landlord, after you ask your landlord, they must give you a good reason to refuse the pets. They can't just say no, ban on pets. They have to give the proper reason why they're refusing you permission to have a pet. And in theory, with the new ombudsman, people may well be able to, if the landlord's excuse isn't good enough, you may be able to go to the ombudsman and query that refusal. And there will also be in the bill an allowance for landlords to an allowance for landlords to require you, the tenant, to take out pet insurance as a stipulation for letting you have a pet. So what do we think is needed? We think the insurance point needs a rethink. Don't forget, we've got 5 weeks of deposit anyway. We don't really think there should be a reason why someone who's already paid a deposit and the home is suitable for a pet should have to pay more money on top of that. And ultimately, we are aware that a big reason why landlords could just refuse pets is because there isn't enough competition in the market, and they could pick, as the pet owner or a non-pet owner, they can quite easily find a non-pet owner to rent to. So we want to see more choice in homes for tenants to increase that competition. So that's it. So we've got a list on here for the next steps. If you want to get involved in the campaign, obviously some of these changes, well, a lot of these changes are really, really good. Big key points: ending Section 21, brilliant. New property portal, brilliant. But we are, as I mentioned various times across this presentation, working to make sure the bill is better. So if you follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, then that would be brilliant. You can share your story with us online. I'm sure Will or someone behind the scenes will post in the comments section where you can do that. And you can also sign up to the Renters Reform Coalition. Renters Reform Coalition is a big coalition that we are a member of lots of different organisations who are also campaigning to make this bill as good as it can be for renters, and that's their Facebook and Twitter there. And we're going to be setting up a Meet Your MP action soon, but anyway, that's not up yet, but you can see that later. Okay, so it's a time for questions. I hope I haven't spoken for too long. No, half an hour almost exactly. There you go. So I'm going to have a look at the Q&A and see what are we going to do. To rent. Someone has asked if there will be automatic right to have a pet under the new register, under the new regs. So as I briefly mentioned, effectively a landlord is not allowed to do a whole ban in a way that they can do now, and they have to give you a specific reason, but they still may well find a good reason, which you may be able to query with an ombudsman, but there's probably a good chance that they will be able to find a relatively good reason to not let you have a pet, unfortunately. Landlord. Someone asked, will the landlord register show the individual properties that a landlord owns? And I'm not 100% sure what the answer to that is. I think part of the problem is that they're still working out exactly what it's going to be in the property portal. I think ideally that would be the case, but how extensive the property pool is going to be is also a little bit in question. But it would be good to see all the different properties. Connor is replying to that, so I may have missed an important part of that answer.
Actually, I was just going to say that that's something that we are working on. We're hoping to sort of push the government in the direction of making sure that all the individual properties that landlord owns are linked to the landlord, hopefully through an amalgamation of both having a landlord's registration thing and having them linked to the unique property reference number of every property that they have. But as Tilly's alluded to, we are in a bit of an unknown. We're not exactly sure what they're going to do, but we will try our best to get that up.
Thank you, Connor. Someone else has asked, do you think this or a future government will give local authorities the power to have rent controls locally? I'm not a fortune teller. I don't know, but I'm personally skeptical, to be completely honest with you. I can't imagine this government certainly doing it, and I can't imagine another government. They tend to focus more on sort of rent stabilization, which is what I mentioned about the restrictions to only one rent increase a year, and we're kind of building on that and asking for restrictions to that 1 a year rent increase. But in terms of sort of local authorities having control over rent, they are quite squeamish about controls like that. So I would be skeptical personally, although the future may hold magical things. I don't know. Someone has asked, when will all this come in? Again, it's very difficult to tell. We're literally at the first reading. So there is a long way to go, and the bill that we have now is going to be very different from the final one that finally comes into law. We're not going to have a second reading, I think, for a couple of months or so. It's going to be a bit of a long one, I'm afraid, I think, from what we can tell. But again, it's quite tricky to tell at the stage exactly how long that's going to be. There's quite a lot of moving parts and components. But we are, it's this is the beginning of quite a long journey, I would imagine, but certainly not as long as where we started off. Someone says, does this apply in Wales? That's a good question. Connor, does this apply in Wales?
No, it doesn't apply in Wales, unfortunately. This is England-specific legislation. Housing's devolved. There is different rules in Wales at the moment. Wales does have a Section 21, not called Section 21, with a 6-month notice period. But it's slightly curious that they haven't moved in this at the same time that England have. Fingers crossed that does change.
Yeah, as housing is a devolved issue, England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland all have different systems. We're the only one, England is the only one that doesn't have a housing register, a landlord register, for example. But obviously that's going to be hopefully remedied with the property portal. Oh, hey, that's a long one. Some of these are very specific. Any possession grounds things will need to be. Okay, so what is asked, will any of the possession grounds, existing or new, be invalid if landlord does/doesn't do X, Y, and Z? This is a really good question. So under the current system, as people may know, if Section 21, if landlord uses Section 21, but they haven't given you your written tenancy agreement or a EPC or your government's how to rent guide, you can query this eviction, and that eviction will be made invalid, and they will have to then reissue a Section 21. So there are certain protections of the current system that we are looking to see extended into the new system. Again, this comes under secondary legislation and new stuff that may come in. The government haven't confirmed there will be extra protections like this, but they also haven't said that there won't be, if that makes sense. So we are quite optimistic that the new system will have some built-in protections, which include things like the requirement for the proper documentation to be given to tenants, and for stuff like that. So again, maybe with a hopeful potentially and possibly, and that is something that we will be pushing for, but we're relatively positive about that, I would say. We are hopeful that it will bring in some new protections like that. Someone has said, how about campaigning to make it easier to get legal injunctions against landlords? Section 21's a ban. if Section 21s are banned, then illegal landlord harassment will greatly increase. So it is definitely a worry, the sort of unintended consequences of getting rid of things like Section 21. I don't know if landlord harassment necessarily will increase dramatically. It just obviously remains to be seen. And there is obviously a big danger that landlords are going to be looking for quite easy loopholes of evicting tenants, which is obviously why we're in the process of making sure that all those loopholes are tightened up and people cannot just evict people via Section 21 via the back door. We are campaigning to, I don't know, sort of legal injunctions specifically. My legal knowledge is not brilliant, to be completely honest with you, but we are campaigning for things like making rent repayment orders easier, for accessing tribunals and access to justice and courts, and holding criminal landlords to account more easily. So I don't know if that's specifically legal injunctions, but we are definitely always campaigning for tenants to be able to access greater justice and some, as much rent that's due back to them, or all these different things. Will there be greater protection for eviction? Someone has asked, will there be greater protection for eviction if you are sick, disabled, or pregnant, etc.? Not that I'm aware of. Again, this is sort of what we are campaigning on, about discretion of courts. So there's a few evictions, a few new grounds under Section 8 and current grounds where what are called mandatory evictions. And these are when, if X, Y, and Z has happened, that's it. A court has to allow for an eviction. So we don't think that's a good idea. We think that individual circumstances should be taken into account in all evictions, and the discretion of courts needs to ultimately be involved in all evictions. I don't think there's anything specific. I mean, the discretion of the courts may look into someone's being ill or pregnant or disabled, and they may definitely consider that. But I think as the new grounds coming in, that they're going to be mandatory, so courts won't be able to make decisions on using those as using those factors to make their decision. So again, the answer is mostly not, but again, we're campaigning to make sure things like that could be considered. Someone said, might there be any rules on when cleaning should be carried out at the end of a tenancy and who should pay for this? There are rules in place. So with the Tenant Fees Act, for example, so things like wear and tear. A landlord cannot charge you money for wear and tear of a property, and they cannot charge you cleaning fees at the end of a tenancy. Obviously, a lot of people's experiences are that landlords still try and get as much of the deposit out at the end of tenancies, even if it is just wear and tear. And obviously, a lot of that gets the system is somewhat open to, if not abuse, then a little bit of naughtiness, should we say? So I suppose short answer is there are currently rules, but we do appreciate that it often doesn't feel that way when landlords sort of often query cleaning at the end of tenancies, every single tenancy, no matter how clean you keep the flat or the house. But that doesn't seem, I don't think that's going to be changed under this bill in any particular way. But obviously we are big proponents of deposit reform. So again, things like that are on our radar. Someone has asked, is there anything the government can do to stop a wave of Section 21 evictions happening before abolishment happens? Is there government appetite to do this? Are you asking for this? So again, unintended consequences of Section 21, it is something we're aware of, could be an issue. I think we're sort of slightly skeptical that there would be a massive wave, simply because if a landlord has a decent tenant, why would they just evict them? Because it's easier to do so now. And most tenants are decent tenants. So I think this is definitely on our radar, and I'm pretty sure the government are also aware of it as an issue. What exactly we are doing on it, I don't know if we have a specific campaign or they have a specific line on it. I think that's all I've got to say on that. I don't know, Connor, is there anything else that I've missed in there?
Oh, not necessarily. It's something that we are aware of. The Scotland example is there, as Heather rightly pointed out. But you're right, there isn't really a reason for a landlord to evict the tenant just arbitrarily because the deadline's coming up. But obviously that is a situation we did see in Scotland, so we do need to be aware of it. We need to make sure that the government are aware of it. That's something the generation will be doing. And ultimately just pointing again towards the thing that the decent landlords will, if they have a reason to evict somebody, they can still use the grounds that will exist after the bill. But those who are looking to be unscrupulous might just evict them just before the end of the Section 21, just before the Section 21 abolition comes into place. So there is definitely scope to sort of make that argument to the government, and hopefully we will make a change in that area.
Thank you, Connor. Someone has asked, we already don't have enough rental properties in the market, but some of the changes and several of your suggestions make being a landlord less attractive. How do you suggest the government manage this? Well, our point will always be, good landlords have nothing to worry about these reforms or any of the reforms that we're pushing as an organisation. The struggle with finding rental properties has got very little to do with landlords staying in the market or leaving the market. It's to do with housing stock. There isn't enough housing stock. We need to see more housing built, full stop. Regardless of whether a landlord, if a landlord sells a house, they either sell it to a person who's our homeowner or they sell it to the landlord. That's not, the house doesn't disappear after they've sold the house. So ultimately, this is a housing issue, housing shortage issue, which I know it's frustrating. It's almost like quite a big, overwhelming issue. But we do campaign continuing for more housing, more social housing, more affordable housing. And we want good landlords. We need landlords to be good. We need these homes to be fit for people to live in, and we need them to be safe and secure. And we think we can have all of that, and we think that's a basic human right, basically. So it's these reforms are nothing to worry about if you're a good landlord and a decent landlord, which plenty of landlords are, I'm sure. Someone has said, will I be able to ask more questions on the subject on the Generation Rent website? Sure. It depends how many you want to ask, I think. Ultimately, I think a big caveat to all of this is we don't know a lot is going to be in the bill, especially around sort of the property portal and lots of different things. So you may be disappointed in some more answers, which will be we're just not sure. And ultimately, we're not lawyers either. So again, we may not be able to give you the comprehensive answer that you're sort of looking for. If there's sort of anything pressing on your mind, there's nothing wrong with dropping us a line and contacting us, but just be aware that we may not have all of the answers, and we're also not we don't have the expertise to sort of give very detailed and complex answers to sort of an issue like this. I think that's, have I missed any questions? Someone's posted a very long thing that I'm worried about starting to read.
That is a very good point. That long question does from Colin, talking about the response that Lloyd Russell Moyle gave to presumably a bit of correspondence that Colin had with him, and there's a few things that he sort of raises within that that we could maybe discuss, Tilly. The first one is that the need to not downgrade mandatory grounds to possession for discretionary to ensure there's a fair hearing in court, and the antisocial behaviour ones in particular for that. We did reference, or Tilly referenced really well when she was answering the question about any specific provisions for renters who are sick or pregnant or anything like that. And that's where a discretionary ground would be really useful to ensure that a judge can look at an individual situation and say, sure, look, that person shouldn't be evicted for this reason. And just having that backstop against it is something that we would certainly reference. The second one is on holiday accommodation, so holiday let. That's not being covered by this bill. There is a couple of bits of legislation, a couple of consultations that are out on that at the moment. It's a part of the Levelling Up bill, which is a different bill. And there is a lot of, I think, understanding in government that something does need to change on this. But the question is, how are they going to do it, and how is it going to have the positive impact on communities in sort of coastal areas where I sort of imagine that you might be? And the answer to that is, we would like to see a licensing scheme. We would like to see a scheme where everybody who runs a holiday let has to sign up to a license, so that the local authority has a bit of power, a bit of agency to say, there's too many holiday lets in this area. The local community haven't got enough housing stock in which to live, and therefore we're not going to allow property to become an Airbnb, for example. The government are looking to do this, but in a different way. They're looking to do it through planning permission. We think there's a bit of a problem with that, but hopefully there'll be some updates over the course of the year as to what's happening in there. Ultimately, we do completely understand that something needs to change. And the last thing is on energy efficiency. So bringing up EPCs to grade C, it does require careful planning, as you said. And basically, that's something that the government are looking to do, but there's lots of ways to skin the cat on that one, and they're a little bit non-committal on various ways. So Generation Rent's position most certainly is that everybody should live in a home which is at least EPCC, and we'll be pushing them to keep that commitment. Sorry, T, that was a very long answer, but
that's very helpful. It's a very long question, so I was like panicked trying to read all of it as well as talking, so that's really helpful. There's a few other questions. Someone has asked if there's a definition of state for state of disrepair. I don't think specifically of disrepair. So currently there are specific requirements and definitions of what counts as a hazard 1, which is more dangerous, and there's more than I can think of on my head. So it's a massive list that local authorities go through. In the new system, when homes are considered decent, there will be a variety of definitions, I think. I don't know if they're defining disrepair specifically, but obviously there will be a whole list of things as to whether there'll be a long definition about what is considered decent specifically. And then there's already stuff that as to what stipulates a safe home in our current system. Someone has asked if there's any new rules coming in which will protect disabled people who rent. So they are going to be, in theory, yes. In the sense that they will be sort of stepping up. It's going to be illegal to not rent to disabled people under the new system, which is a step up from what it currently is. So that's good. So yes, is a short answer. There's obviously a caveat to that, which is landlords may still try and get around it for various complicated reasons. But short answer, yes, there will be greater. It will be harder for landlords to refuse to rent to disabled people, which again is a good thing. Someone has asked, what will the timescale to implement the decent home standards into homes once the regulations are passed, i.e. how long will landlords have to not do the work? I don't know what they are off the top of my head, but there are there specific, I don't think there are specific timescales actually in the decent home standards. No. Connor's shaking his head. So no, there aren't any timescales. That's what the sort of AWAB's law would sort of specifically introduce in damp and mold specifically, but there isn't any timescales involved in the decent home standard, which is going to be set to be introduced into law. So again, that's obviously not good either.
What I would just say on that one is that we know that they're consulting on the decent home standard. Generation Rent is sitting on the panel where they are they're making changes to what the decent home standard is, because it currently exists in the social rented sector, as Tilly said earlier. There's a commitment to bring it into the private rented sector through this bill, but they are updating it because they think some things do need tweaking. So they're currently doing that, and the stated aim is to have the changes ready at the same time as the bill is ready and just seamlessly bring them in together. Whether that works or not, we don't know. But what I would say is, even though some alarm bells have been rung about the fact they haven't given us any information on the decent home standard, that's the reason why, is that they are consulting on it, and we will continue to be a part of the consultation process, and then hopefully, once they've completed that, push them hard to ensure that it comes in at the same time as the bill does. So that's also a reason why we don't know exactly whether there'll be a timescale to implement, because they are looking at all of these things.
Thank you. Someone has posted that the rabbits law, obscure rabbits law, came into is from the time of the World Wars, when people kept rabbits and hens in their back gardens to provide protein and meat. So there we go. I learned something new today. I thought it was older than that, but it goes from 20th century. Someone has asked, will the new regulations allow small landowners, for example, farmers, to set themselves up as small local housing associations to provide local homes for local people? There has been some suggestion this will be coming. I have not heard of this, so I am completely unfamiliar with that. Have you heard of that, Connor?
Oh, I hadn't heard of that. That's a very interesting
Yeah.
proposal. I think it's probably, if that's something that you've heard, I don't know where you've heard that, Robin, but it's reflective of the situation, which is there are a lot of people who are, or a lot of organizations who are thinking of quite creative solutions to this housing crisis. We know from Generation Rent, we've been asked recently on a couple of things. One is the zero deposit mortgage, and there are various other things that obviously there are people who are looking for creative solutions. And broadly speaking, that's an indicator of just how difficult the housing market is, both for renters and for everybody else. So this may be an example of that. And basically, if it's something that works, it's something that provides more accommodation, it's something that landlords are able to, that housing is able to be provided, then that's good. Small
Right,
housing
it's the
associations are model
CLA.
providing homes in rural areas as the rural supply is so difficult. That's actually very interesting. I'll definitely take a look at that. And hopefully we will see a bit of progress in the rural areas, because you're right, supply is so difficult. A lot of that is also to do, I think, with farm work and seasonal work, which has slightly been touched on by the bill, in as much as evictions will still remain for people who are in short-term fixed accommodation related to seasonal work. They'll still be eligible to have a Section 21, or what is not a Section 21, but a no-fault eviction passed on to them.
So I think that's all the questions that we have. We still have, amazingly, I think the first time ever I've been in a webinar, we're ahead of schedule by 5 minutes. So if anyone has any final questions that they want to throw away, then now is the time to do it. But I'll put back on the screen the next step stuff. So on if you get any new follows, any new signups, any new stories from people here, obviously that's brilliant. We are going to be doing, our lives are going to be completely dominated by this bill for the next many months. So, you know, we're going to be pushing heavily on this, as will a whole load of other organizations on various sides of the equation. So the bill now certainly is not going to be the bill when it finally comes through. There's going to be lots of changes to it. But certainly I've sort of outlined the main things to watch in the coming months, and sort of, you know, really big ending Section 21 and the new Section 8 grants are probably going to be some of the biggest new changes and the biggest bits, as well as the property portal and various other things. So thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I really hope that was helpful. I'm aware that we probably didn't give people, there's some stuff that we don't know, there's some stuff that nobody knows yet, and I appreciate that can be quite frustrating, but we will keep everyone updated as much as we can, as much as we possibly can, over the course of the bill. Someone's asked a student quite a good question. How will periodic tenancies work for students? Very good question. I believe students are going to be kept on almost like a version of the old system, aren't they, where they have sort of fixed terms, if it's in student purpose-built accommodation. Is that right, Connor?
Student purpose-built accommodation, which is essentially a tower block built for student halls, basically, is a conception of that, is not a part of the bill. So if you live there, you still have standard length tenancies, basically relating to your student years. Periodic tenancies, in theory, would work for students as works for everybody else. They are not currently exempt. If you live in like a HMO, you know, your standard sort of student house conception. However, there are more than murmurings that will change. It looks like something that the government will be working on and will probably change over the course of the bill, which will mean that students will be put back into standard tenancies, you know, fixed term tenancies, or be given a mechanism to have them removed from their homes, basically getting a Section 21 in the end of July to ensure they're out for September or something like that. That's something that we don't necessarily agree with, but we think that ship has basically sailed and it's going to happen anyway. So the real concern is to ensure that it really does target only the students who are sort of intended to be caught up by that. So those who live in your classic student house, and not anybody who's classed as a student, and that would lead to quite vast swathes of the population losing their rights. But that's definitely one to look out for over the course of the bill, because there will be changes, there will be pressure from all sides. So nothing is fixed on that one yet.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much. Someone's just asked, and this will be the final question to answer. Sorry, someone said, will the slides be circulated? Yes, they will. We will circulate the slides. Someone's also asked, I never get a rent statement. Is this a legal requirement either now or in the new bill? By rent statement, I'm not sure exactly by rent statement, if that's so. Currently, your landlord needs to give you at the beginning of a tenancy a tenancy, a written tenancy, a government how to rent guide, a EPC, which is the energy EPC, I've forgotten what the word is.
Energy performance certificate.
Performance certificate. I know I did this before and I forgot the same word as well. My mind blanked. Oh, sorry, I've done some too long now. An energy safety certificate, a gas safety certificate if there's gas supply in your home, and they need to show you proof or confirmation that your deposit has been put in a protected scheme. If they don't do all of those things, then and they try to evict you with Section 21, you can use that as a defence against it, in which they have to begin the whole process again. I don't think, sort of, if you're thinking about a rent statement, if that's kind of an ongoing statement or something, I don't think that's a requirement or anything. And
yeah, I wonder if Chris is asking about basically a receipt of rent every month to prove that
okay, that's not a requirement, I don't believe, and will not be in the new bill. But we're hoping to extend those requirements to protect people against Section 21, the documentation requirements into this bill, and that's something that we will be working on. Amazing. Well, that's all the time we've got for everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, yes, we'll have an email to say thank you and to circulate the PowerPoint. And please do keep in touch and keep it sign up to find out what's going on with us, because this is going to be quite an exciting time, we think.
Absolutely. Tilly, on behalf of the panel, on behalf of the audience, thank you very much for a fantastic presentation. It was very, very informative. And there was plenty of comments and questions to that end, so people did enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Yay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.